Jesse showed up early next morning for breakfast. I wasn't hungry, so I watched him eat. Before he finished, he asked me if I would like to go on an adventure. I was just on one, I answered, but I could not turn him down. So I said I was. He reached down to his side and picked up a suitcase and handed it over. It contained leather hiking boots, work dungarees, and a hat. He said, "Bring these." I laughed. "Are we traveling up the Amazon?" "Maybe," he replied. He finished breakfast while I changed and got ready to go. Once out the front door, Jesse called for transport. Soon afterward, we arrived in a small dusty town on the planet Serengeti called Vumbi. It means dusty in Swahili. A few hundred people, adventurers, assembled on the 10th of every odd month in the tavern of the hotel called Kupumzika, meaning restful. The hotel only had 30 rooms, but its tavern could cater to over 300 people. We exited the transport vehicle with our gear at the opposite end of town. A donkey, a cow, and a few monkeys were the only living creatures present upon our arrival. The road leading up to the small, primitive, dusty hotel turned out to be heavy dust or mud puddle. Today it was pothole dust. I sneezed a few times and stumbled over my feet a couple others, and that was just getting out of the vehicle. Along the road were only 2 other buildings besides the hotel at the other end of town. The buildings were more like dusty huts, with a grass-covered stall attached to one building where the donkey lived. The monkeys ran off into the jungle, the donkey turned away, and the cow came up as if looking for a handout. So, I patted her on the head and declared, I was not expecting a reception, but thank you. I wondered why anyone would want to come to this dirty little town. I asked Jesse, why would anyone come here? He replied, it is not as awful as your first impression, father. Though the hotel is small, and the township made of dust, the tavern with its remote location makes it preferable for the adventurer's purpose. Because it's secluded, it does not fill up with the public. Around 300 adventurers have to squeeze into the tavern at one time. If the public were to invade, there would not be sufficient room to fit them all. I followed Jesse up to the old ramshackle hotel. As we entered, I read a handwritten sign next to the front doors that said best food in town. I turned to look behind me, and then at the cow, and thought lucky for her we don't eat meat. Once inside, it was a different story. First thing, we faced a wide wooden counter made of high-polished mahogany. I could see our reflection in the front veneer. The floors of the hotel appeared to be rough walnut planks. They revealed their age from years of wear and tear, but were carefully kept. Even though the windows were dirty, it impressed me. As we walked up to the counter and set our gear down, a savvy young man sporting a tall red hat asked us our names. Jesse responded with our last name as the young man stood straight up and promptly wrote them down in the log. He came across as alert and astute. Then, he asked Jesse, anything I can do for you, Mr. Flake? Jesse answered, I was just wondering if it was too early to have access to our room? The young clerk said, no sir, check-in was an hour ago, at noon. He handed us our keys, then turned around to a wall of wooden cubby holes, pulled a note from one of them and handed it to Jesse. It was from a friend of his. It read, I will be there tomorrow should you need a map reader, John. Jesse wrote, yes, on the letter, then gave it back to the clerk. He told him when the man showed up to return the note. The clerk slapped his hand down on a bell. Shortly thereafter, a bellhop wearing a similar red hat came dashing around the corner from the right of the reception desk. He seized our bags and said, follow me, please. There were stairways 10 feet from the reception desk on either side leading up to the second floor. The bellhop took the one to the right. We followed as he led us down the hall 4 doors to the right. He let us in, abandoned our gear, tipped his hat, said good day mates, and departed. We barely had time to say thank you. The room had 2 single beds. They didn't look too comfortable. Although, the room was properly kept, except for the windows, like the rest of the hotel from what I have observed so far. The bathroom was small and cramped. I guess it was a place to sleep. Jesse turned and said, let's go downstairs and get lunch. I said, yes. Since I skipped breakfast, I am hungry. We returned downstairs and continued down a hall to the left which led to the tavern. The tavern was large compared to the hotel, and out of place for the small dusty town. It could hold over 300 people, 200 on the main floor, and another 100 up on a balcony. Old wooden, nicked up, well-worn tables were placed close to one another from one end of the room to the other. It was dusty, most of which was in the air, as I could taste it and see the particles floating against the sunlight coming through the dirty windows. We sat at a small table near one of those windows. Jessie said, "Dad, try the fish. They serve a fish called the geelbeck. It doesn't have a real fishy flavor and they cook it with mushrooms and tomatoes. You'll like it." I replied, "Excellent, order for both of us, son." Along with lunch, Jessie ordered a famous drink called hard apple. One drink and it cleaned my sinuses. It was viciously strong and had a bite like well-aged high-proof rum, although it had no alcohol. Afterward, it left the taste of an apple in your mouth. It was a most popular drink among the adventurers. I liked it, but hard drinks and food have never sat well with me. May I have a soda, please? We ate lunch, which was interesting. I was not sure if I liked the fish or not. Perhaps, I would have to try it a few times before I make that decision, I suppose. I asked, "What do we do now, Jess? A nap perhaps?" Jessie responded, "It is almost 3 p.m., Dad. The adventurers will fill the tavern any time now. If we leave, there is no guarantee we will get a good table later on when the activity starts." I asked Jessie, "Where do these people stay? If the hotel didn't have room enough for them all, they must stay in another hotel, or do they come by transport when they need to?" Jessie replied, "Even though Vumbi has a population of several monkeys, a donkey, a cow, and 6 hotel staff, it is not as remote as it appears. 10 miles to the east of us is the tremendous city of Abidjan. Abidjan is a big metropolitan city. I believe the population of the city and surrounding neighborhoods is like 1.5 million. Most of the adventurers stay there." Then he said, "I like to stick around here. I have stayed at Abidjan enough times to learn the city thoroughly, but I am usually late to adventure meetings when I stay there. So, I spend the night here so I don't end up standing all night." I asked, "What do you mean, son?" He answered, "You'll see, Dad." Then he said, "We can go over to Abidjan once we have a quest and a team." Okay. So we sat and stared out into space as others came in and took the remaining seats. As the men and women assembled in the rustic tavern throughout the afternoon, many sat around visiting and partaking of their favorite rough and tumble drink. By early evening, it turned into standing room only and I understood what Jessie meant. Most of the participants were rough-looking, wearing shabby clothes and goofy-looking hats. The men often had wrinkles, scares, and unkempt beards. Some women sported wild hairstyles and one woman had a patch over her eye. Losing an eye cannot happen in Sierra. I looked at Jessie as he explained, "We dress up because it's part of the game. Zoe, the woman with the eye patch, lost her eye about 6 quests ago. She kept the patch because she thinks it gives her a unique look. We have to look authentic, father." The other adventurers I talked with were nice, ready to give me advice. I could tell the whole group was friendly with one another and knew each other well. I hadn't noticed we sat there for so long, but around 6 p.m., an angel walked up to the stage then called the room to order. The main floor had a small half-round stage up front, butted up against the front wall. When the time came, that large angel stood at a podium where he introduced other angels to join him, 77 in all, and one by one to give out an equal number of quests. In the beginning, before Sierra was fully operational, a watcher asked the officials in Jerusalem if he could develop these quests for entertainment. Watcher, Aaron Levy, planned and organized the first one to show Jerusalem how the quests would work. Aaron was an experienced Spanish explorer on Earth back in the 1700s. While leading an expedition into the Yucatan Peninsula, in Mexico, he discovered an old Mayan temple. As the group was measuring its size, he and everyone with him vanished when they walked out over a cenote. The ground gave way from their combined weight and everyone in the expedition drowned. Their skeletons were discovered 15 years later when another explorer found the same temple. Aaron had given a lot of attention to his proposal as he spent years perfecting the first one. When he presented it to Jerusalem, they enthusiastically approved his request. They were impressed with his presentation and would assign several thousand angels to help with the program's creation. The idea has expanded throughout the other 41 inhabited regions. Aaron will always hold the title Master of Adventure. Other adventurers would recognize him as the highest-ranking adventurer in the whole universe. Each quest took place on one of thousands of uninhabitable planets, ones with livable conditions, but not in sync with the habitable planets. Angels built whole civilizations to mimic ancient, modern, and futuristic societies. The angels could build a nation, a complete society in a couple weeks with incredible detail. Because of all the work to make them authentic, quests were only given out every other month on the 10th to allow for the story, the design, and the construction necessary for each one. Every quest involved a secret artifact or discovery that would need to be gained or resolved. For example, one group had to recover a crystal globe which was a centerpiece for the power source for an empire's major dam. A group of men from the neighboring empire stole it. The crystal was essential as it provided the crucial links to 4 different shield generators which prevented the dam from breaking, and could only be removed for cleaning. It needed to be restored within the following 30 days. Otherwise, the dam would rupture and destroy the city below. Another example, an expedition had to figure out what caused a whole city of 10,000 people to become suspended in time. The group needed to figure out several riddles and defeat several beasts to solve the quest. They were given 3 weeks to achieve their task. Otherwise, the people would never be released from their status and subsequently disappear into eternity. Although these adventures might sound dangerous, no one ever died, as it was more like virtual reality, except you physically traveled to your location. If you perished in the quest, you'd be returned to the Hotel Kupumzika, and the quest would be over for you. Both angels and companions became engaged as characters within the quests. Specials could not handle the complexities of a quest because they were too single-minded. They could not think far outside their programming, so companions made up the quest sectors. The information regarding the quests was fed into the companion hive, and they would choose for themselves whether to get involved with a particular quest or not. With 2 billion KIs living in the hive, quests sponsors and developers had no problem finding characters. Once they released the information into the hive, it only took a few minutes to collect the needed characters. Often, 200,000 or 300,000 companions or more might activate for a single quest to make up whole civilizations. In minutes they might create a 10,000-man Roman army, or 200,000 inhabitants for a complete country. Imagination was the only limit. To the companions it was like playing a multiplayer game, and they didn't make it comfortable for anyone either. For the highly complex quests, angels played the primary roles as characters. Those were the tough ones to accomplish. It is one thing to outmaneuver a companion, but another thing to bamboozle an angel. Nearly inconceivable. What they found interesting was when the developers reported the companions not involved in a particular quest were following the quests while in the hive. Even more startling was idle companions made up and submitted scenarios for future quests. As we sat there, Jesse explained at the other end of the hotel, opposite from the inn, was a sitting room. The whole room was a transporter used to transport teams with their equipment to the area of the quest. It was the same room you returned to should you die within the adventure. Then he described how each quest had diverse levels of complexity. An adventurer might receive a fair amount of intelligence for a quest, but more than often they had to figure everything out. To be fair to different people with different levels of experience, separate categories of quests were created, ones for the beginners, the greenhorns, and to the experienced masters. If it was your first adventure, you were a greenhorn. Then after greenhorn, it was by the numbers. You were a 0 until you accomplished 10 quests. Then a 10, a 20 and so on until you reached 60. When you have over 60 quests under your belt, you are a Jones. I wondered again if anyone in Sierra had a sense of originality. You were a Jones from 60 through 100 quests, and after that you're considered a master. Jesse was a Jones because he had 80 quests under his belt. So, he was an accomplished team leader, so were his boys. As Jesse was explaining those things, a man walked across the front of the room. I almost called out to him, thinking it was my friend John from the Jade Coast. John was an adventurer and was probably standing around somewhere in the tavern. It wasn't him, but someone who looked like him. After that, I became disoriented for a few minutes knowing I remembered someone whom I have not seen since I arrived in Sierra. The memories that were given me almost made me think I had a split personality, perhaps schizophrenia. I suspected that if I were immortal, I would know how to deal with these things, but I am somewhere in between living both lives. I didn't feel bad, but once in a while those other memories were startling. My friend John was also an artist called a carver, and some carvers were like adventurers in that finding their raw materials can be a quest by itself. I turned and asked, Jesse, have you seen John? Do you know if he is here for the quests? He replied, oh, I am supposed to say hi for him. I talked to him a couple days ago. He said he couldn't make it because he and the boys were going ruby hunting up in the Steel Islands before winter set in. By the way, Dad, hi. That boy of mine, he's just too funny. He and John often shared quests. At around 7 p.m., the head angel called the lead angels of each quest up to the stage, and each gave a brief introduction regarding said quest. Interested adventurers, based on their experience, would put their name in a hat. When all the interested parties, for the current quest, put their name in the hat, they drew one name. 77 quests are given out at each meeting. I now realized it would be a long night. The process would go into the early hours of the morning. Once the last quest was taken, everyone headed for bed. We got to bed 12 hours after taking our seats in the tavern. It was 3 a.m. before we got up from our seats to go to bed. The next morning the hotel filled up as the quest leaders organized their teams. Teams might be as few as 2 people or as high as 30. Each team needed an archaeologist, a linguist, a map reader, trackers, protection, cooks for a large expedition. In addition, each team comprised a writer, a photographer, and video professional to record the quest. These 3 people would be exempt from any danger the quest might present. They survived no matter what until the quest succeeded or failed. The photos, recordings, and books, along with the artifacts were displayed in the adventure museums throughout Sierra. Also, they were made available to the public and were very popular. I asked why some small teams comprised only 2 to 4 people. Jesse explained that some master adventurers filled all the different positions within a group and became expert at each. The smaller teams included only such experienced masters. I was at the lowest skill level, a greenhorn, a greenhorn's greenhorn. I enjoyed absolutely no natural qualifications in this kind of situation. Apparently, and I gave it some thought, this was my first time joining a team. At least I didn't recall doing this before. Jesse said he has been after me to do it for decades. These quests have been going on for 200 years as of this year. So, the little rascal caught me off balance, playing to my insanity, strumming my ignorance. Not all adventurers received a quest, but most joined the team with no problem. Many of the masters would go home if they didn't get one. I said see ya, as a couple masters walked out the hotel door. Each looked back at me then grinned. I heard one of them say something about the color green as the door closed behind them. Maybe his lawn needed mowing. I'm sure he was going home to cut the grass. Jesse got one requiring at least a team of 20 people. So, on the second day he assembled the team, including John as map reader. Afterward, he handed out our assignments. Well, duties for those of us who didn't know what to do. Honestly, I overheard him make only one assignment. Feeling special, he entrusted me to assist the archaeologist, certain I am supposed to carry his equipment. I appreciate my son meant well. Fortunately, I didn't have to carry any heavy provisions as companions did most of the heavy work. If the group included over 10, several companions joined to carry the gear, food, tents, etc., but not always. Their degree of involvement depended on the criteria of the quest. Once Jesse put his team together, he walked up to the young clerk at the reception counter and told him we're ready. Then, he told the young man to call his name in the afternoon the next day. I forgot he planned to show me around Abidjan. Jesse told the rest of the team we'd be leaving the next day at 2 in the afternoon. It was 10 am, so it would be a little over 28 hours before we left. The plan was acceptable to the team, and the team split up to go their separate ways, with exception of John. John was going to Abidjan with us. Abidjan turned out to be a unique city. One would think they arrived in Egypt. In the center of town was a great pyramid with a walkway wrapped around leading all the way to the top. There was a garden on top in which to sit and gaze over the whole city while listening to a group of African musicians playing wonderful African music. What impressed me most were the clothes worn by many of the people, notably the women. I have seen African robes before, but I'd never have expected to see such colorful ones, with such noble turbans worn high from the head. I stared transfixed by all the colors against their lovely black skin. Each young woman moved or walked with such grace. If I said anything about my first impression of Abidjan, it would be colorful. Abidjan had blocks of skyscrapers crowding its central downtown area and surrounding the Great Pyramid. All of them with landing pads for transport vehicles as none were allowed on the streets below. Instead, an antique trolley system delivered us from place to place around the city. While wandering around, I recalled all the fountains I have seen over the last several months. Then I thought if I said anything about my first impression of Sierra, it would be fountains. Abidjan was no exception, except the fountains in Abidjan were much larger than most. And like most fountains you discover anywhere, they were full of children swimming with parents lounging on park benches keeping an eye on them. Fountains are conduits to a tranquil soul. So, I am not objecting. We picked out a modest restaurant. We ate jollof rice and mekui, roasted lamb for lunch. After lunch, we continued to walk around. While doing so, the sky clouded up quickly. It rained hard and heavy for 10 minutes. Those without umbrellas headed for cover in the building and plaza entryways. If you didn't have an umbrella and you couldn't get to cover fast enough, you got soaked. The clouds dissipated as fast as they came. As the rain evaporated, a mist rose from the hot cement, and the tops of the buildings. The pyramid looked like a cloud. It was so thick you couldn't see your feet on the ground. I could smell the rain through the mist as we walked through town. We looked in many of the shops, visited with all the people along the way, and later that evening returned to the hotel. Abidjan was a splendid modern city. I considered how incredible it has been to travel to the places I have over the last several months, with each new place being more impressive than the last. Sharing them with my children was more important than anything else. Jesse and I spent the rest of the evening down in the little inn. John remained in Abidjan, so he didn't come back with us. A group of adventurers were sitting around and we struck up a conversation with them. Jesse knew them and introduced me. Jesse said, "Dad, this is Melvin, Peter, and Paul Lardy." Everyone said their hellos. "Glad to meet you." First thing Melvin asked Jesse how many he had in the quest he won. Jesse responded, "I got a 20-man quest, you?" Melvin said, "I got a 10. I have 8 days to accomplish it." Jesse answered, "I am required to finish in 24 days. Melvin replied, "Good for you. Will this be 81 for you?" Jesse answered, "Yep, it won't be long before you will have to call me master," as he smiled. We visited with the group for 2 hours. The 3 of them were brothers from Missouri, who survived most of the tribulation by hiding up in the Ozark mountain range. They were teenagers when the rapture took place before the tribulation. To avoid being drafted into the Antichrist's military, they escaped into the Ozarks. While there, they found a prepper's underground facility, with no indication what happened to the prepper. The facility was well stocked and could have supported at least 10 people for many years. While out scouting one day, Peter came across a starving family. He could not turn them away and brought them back to the underground facility. The family turned out to be Christians. It was one thing to be hiding from the world government, even worse if you confessed to be a Christian. Officials loved to show you to the world and execute you in front of the masses, especially if you refused to renounce Christ. All three boys accepted Christ because of that family. 4 years into the tribulation, the government captured the whole group, and executed them at a public square in St. Louis on live television. It impressed me at the courage so many people had during that horrible time, but unfortunately for many they didn't find Christ before the tribulation. They would have avoided so much agony. After their story, it seemed like we had become good friends. It was too funny they found my story equally impressive even though it read like a safe and simple story. I could never imagine what they went through. Yet they stood strong until the end. We shook hands and headed to bed. The next afternoon, while I was putting on my adventure's clothes, Jesse's team was called. Once assembled, we entered the transport room, and then were transported to our destination. Upon arrival, things got crazy. I didn't last over 5 minutes. As soon as we landed, a band of native scouts attacked us. I, along with John the map reader and 2 companions, died instantly, receiving for my trouble an arrow to the center of my back. It hurt for a moment, then nothing. I felt bad for John. He struggled to look after me and received 2 arrows to the chest and 1 in the head for his effort. We launched back to the transport room along with others who didn't last long in their quests either. John laughed, got up to shake my hand. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Jeff. Hopefully, we will share another quest sometime," he said. I responded, "Perhaps, but who will map read this one?" "No problem, Jesse is an excellent map reader," he replied as he walked out of the room. Then I said to myself, well, happy hunting, Jess. That was my encounter with quests. The next morning, like other mornings when not finding fascinating places to go or wonderful people to see, I would strike up conversations with Dana. Often Bart joined in as both migrated to the kitchen early morning. Dana often filled me in on me before my transformation. Yet, she was always prudent not to tell me or show me anything not permitted. Also, it proved to be too hard to carry on a conversation when I couldn't understand half of what she said. I walked into town twice, spending the day sitting in the park and meandering around with the other tourists. It was a beautiful little seaside tourist town. It was often full of people shopping while eating ice cream, me particularly. "I am sorry. Let me clean that up," is how I usually greeted shop owners. I loved watching how the kids and companions got along. I walked up into the neighborhood in the hills outside town twice. One particular house had a fountain in the front yard. The fountain, besieged by a small stone patio, was striking. It was skirted by rhododendrons, red, yellow, and white ones. A small table sat on the patio with a few wrought iron chairs next to it. I don't know what possessed me, but I took a seat in a chair, then plucked a sandwich from my pocket I'd gotten from the lunch truck. Kids came rushing out of the house and stood around me. None of them said anything while unflinchingly staring at me. Mother soon pursued. She sat in one of the other chairs across from me. She asked me, "Would you like a drink with your sandwich?" I boldly said, "Yes, that would be great." How odd of me to do such a thing, and I felt genuinely like a vagabond. She came back with a soda and delivered it and then sat back down. Alice and I talked for a while, about the town, her kids, and her husband's work. Apparently, he was one of the artisans, a glass blower who had a shop down near the beach. I didn't recall his name when she told me, which caused me to feel awful. I planned to stop in and tell him what a nice family he has. We had an enjoyable conversation, and I told her I was infatuated with her fountain and patio. I could not resist taking a seat. She told me I was not the first. She said, "Please take Sanctuary there any time you like. Just ignore the kids and they will eventually get distracted by something else and leave you alone." Laughing, I said, "See you later and thank you for your hospitality. I will stop in and meet your husband, especially since I admire blown glass art." As I continued walking around, I observed the neighborhood was overcrowded with mansions, everyone too close together for my taste. I met several other people as I walked. People who lived in the neighborhood, and on 3 distinct occasions, I was invited in for lunch by others I didn't even know or remember. I got home early in the evening, sat by the fire reading my Bible. I retired early and watched the stars from my cubby by the window. Only one dull moon crept out that night. It didn't have sufficient light to block the stars from shining. I could see waves of stars looking as if racing across the night sky. The park beside the house looked mysterious. Several cats ran in and out of the shadows, looking like little monstrous beings throughout the night. I heard infrequent meows, repeatedly coming from the same area of a pair of glowing eyes, which looked like binary stars against the darkness. I feared that those darn cats might be up to no good. One sizable black cat came up to the window and arched its back as if to tell me to let him in. I shrieked, "No way am I getting out of bed, you silly cat." It must have heard me as it ran back into the park. After chasing that cat off, I watched the stars until I fell asleep. The next day, the 4th day, I was pandering to my laziness, again. I am positive it was because of my longitude and latitude, or perhaps becoming too complacent. So, I took a trip to the planet Maul. Maul was the smallest planet in the system. Even so, it had the largest mall in Sierra. Of course, it was called Mall. Why call it anything else, right? It had miles of shops, restaurants, gardens, and theaters. Funny thing is, it did not take long to figure out teenagers acted the same no matter what place or era they lived in. The mall attracted every single teenager from the region like the Pied Piper of Hamelin attracted rats, running, bumping into everything, and everyone who got in their way. Mall not only had the largest shopping center in Sierra, it also had a substantial open-air market that took place daily from Sunday through Thursday, right outside the mall. Millions of citizens came and set up shop, selling different handmade articles, which was a popular practice throughout Sierra. Money wasn't a requirement because everything one needed was free based on the co-op system. The farmer grew vegetables. He gave his vegetables to the stores. The stores offered their vegetables to the factory owner, who handed over the farm machinery to the farmer. To benefit from the co-op, a citizen had to work 3 days a week. Some jobs demanding different schedules, such as the farmer can't work 3 days per week and neglect his crops the other 4, but it all averaged out. Even though money wasn't a necessity, it was used for purchasing items such as homemade crafts sold at the open-air market, artwork, and anything else not covered by the co-op. The way a person earned such money might include making crafts and peddling them, which was the favorite means to do so. One could work an extra day or 2 throughout the week. Sierra offered many ways to generate money should one want or desire it. Particularly, when a teenager was still in school, whatever job or craft they took on always paid. So, there was a process by which one could move beyond the co-op type purchasing. The currency used throughout Sierra was the shekel, period. Each coin had engraved on it "Holiness unto the Lord." So, whatever you did beyond the co-op, you got paid in shekels. Now, the shekel was a brilliant coin made of gold or silver. A group called the Short Standers made all the coins used throughout Sierra. I strolled around the mall for a couple hours and acquired 4 tank top t-shirts. I ate lunch, Strimboli with a root beer, all of which was free, then returned home. Once home, I thought while here in Sierra, while going from place to place, adventure to adventure, I thought about how I had become more observant than I ever remembered being. I remembered things I would have forgotten in a matter of minutes. Now, they were unnaturally stored in my brain. I devoted that evening to sit by the fire writing, unnaturally, about everything I could recall since coming to Sierra, about everything I could recall since coming to Sierra, about everything I could recall since coming to Sierra, about everything I could recall since coming to Sierra, about everything.